So today we are delighted to host Nathan Goonan, who since April 2020 has been Group Executive, Strategy and Innovation at National Australia Bank. Before his current role, Nathan was EGM Group Strategy and Development at NAB, where he oversaw NAB's global strategy and mergers and acquisitions activities. Prior to that, he was EGM Corporate Affairs at NAB. Finally, Nathan has also worked as an investment banker at Goldman Sachs. Nathan has a connection to the University of Melbourne, where he earned his Bachelor of Agricultural Science and Commerce with honors. Finally, and perhaps most interestingly, Nathan grew up on a dairy farm in Ditterong, which is in Northeast Victoria. And I did check how to pronounce that during the break. I hope I got it right. It's Ditterong, is that right?
Ditterang.
Ditterang. Oh, I got the wrong. It was incorrect. I was misled.
Okay. Points for trying. You did
Ditterang. Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
So Nathan, welcome to the Financial Institutions MBA class at Melbourne Business School.
Thanks for having me. Yeah, great to be here. It would be freezing cold up in Ditterang, so I'm glad I'm not there now.
Is that right?
Nice to be with you tonight. Yeah.
Okay. All right. So why don't we start with some questions? The first few questions will come from me, and they have to do with the divestment from CYBG.
Yeah.
So, as of course you know, NAB had a period of overseas acquisitions in the U.S. and the U.K. in 1987 through 97, followed by some divestments in 2000 through 2016. Just a few highlights: in 1987, NAB acquired Clydesdale Bank in Scotland and Northern Bank in Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland, and it subsequently rebranded the Northern Ireland operations to National Irish Bank. In 1990, NAB acquired Yorkshire Bank in England and Wales, and in 2005 combined Clydesdale Bank and Yorkshire Bank to form CYBG. It then acquired a few other banks in New Zealand and the United States, and then starting in 2000 began a series of divestments. So in 2000, NAB sold Michigan National Bank to ABN AMRO. Skipping ahead a few years, in 2014, NAB sold shares in its US subsidiary Great Western Bank via an IPO and sold the remaining shares in 2015. Also in 2014, NAB announced that it would sell CYBG through an IPO, and the divestment was completed in 2016 with the 25% IPO and the remaining shares distributed to NAB shareholders. I wonder if you could tell us, what was the thinking behind the acquisitions and the subsequent divestments? And does this experience have any lessons for other banks that may be contemplating overseas expansions?
Yeah, good question, David. And so I'll weave in a little bit of my career as we answer a few, if that's okay. So great. Yeah, I joined NAB in 2013 from Goldman Sachs, where I'd been in financial services M&A, and then joined NAB into an M&A role. So was and my current role now still has responsibility for M&A along with strategy and innovation and also sort of how we spend our organic capital. So the investments and capital expenditure we make. And so on the M&A side and the international expansions, I think I could probably start with why they will have, what the rationale of an international expansion was, and then sort of why that's sort of not as relevant now. If you think back to that time, what was not as possible as it currently is was that you could get exposure on the stock market to international stocks. It wasn't as easy as it currently sounds for an investor in Australia to buy exposure to, say, a UK bank. It wasn't that easy for an Australian investor to buy exposure to a US bank. And so there was, effectively the global banks was a much bigger thing there, where that you could take the skills that you had in your home market and take them to, international markets. One, it was to provide greater access for your domestic shareholders to better growth. And so, there's bigger markets certainly outside of Australia and New Zealand in both the UK, Europe and the US. but then also this geographical diversification. There was, a view in the investment thesis of NAB at the time would have been that they had a more diversified earnings base than, say, the Commonwealth Bank of Australia, who was domestically focused. And then there was things like, the US business for NAB was all about agribusiness. And so, it's a huge market in the US. There's something like the same population of Australia as in 7 states in the Midwest of the US. And it's something like 10 times the agricultural output of the whole country. So there was we're Australia's biggest agri bank, and so there was a view that you could transfer those skills over there. Why that didn't work was a few things. I think certainly post GFC, when banks started to fail around the world, domestic regulators became much more intrusive around, or much more active in making sure, as governments were bailing out banks, that they were bailing them out for reasons that were happening in their home country. And so that there was much more taxpayers' money was going to help banks to survive during the GFC than they wanted banks that were operating domestically and helping stimulate those home economies, and not necessarily economies of other countries where, essentially you were bailed out by your home country. And you saw that in Australia when Bank West was sold to CBA, that was owned by a UK bank, and got itself into trouble, and then CBA bought it in Australia. And we saw it in effectively that started for NAB as well, where regulators were very strong on the fact that actually having an international bank became more of a penalty rather than any benefit of diversification. So, and then I think there is just simply, it is very difficult to manage a bank at all. It's extremely difficult to manage a bank across jurisdiction. And post the GFC, you're seeing a much more localised regulation regime, and that makes it more and more difficult. And we see that even with New Zealand, David. Our New Zealand bank is very core and it's a great business for us. But more and more, the regulation is making that more of the activities, more of your technology needs to be in New Zealand, so that if something goes wrong, the New Zealand business is quarantined from your Australian business. So that's a little bit of the rationale, and I think you've seen it globally that banks are becoming much more domestic and much more focused on their core.
I see. Okay, interesting. That's really, I did not know about all that. So thanks so much for that explanation. Okay, so I'd like to now move on to some student questions, and we're going to begin with some questions about 86400. And our first question comes from Group 2. Group 2.
Yeah, thanks very much for joining us, Nathan. Ben Craig here. For quite a while, your bank was considered a bit of a fighter brand by NAB in the emerging neobank space. And it found some success early on too. 86400, on the other hand, has doubled its losses from 2019 to 2020. And the acquisition was really around bringing together an established business with a technology platform. NAB's already invested pretty heavily in its own technology. So was it really about acquiring the technology, or was there something more to the acquisition as well?
No, it really was about the technology, Ben. It's a good question, and you're right to call out that we've spent a lot of money on our technology. One of the realities of any large bank, and probably any large corporate, is that your technology system over time becomes very complex. And so, and what that means is your ability to move quickly, despite the fact that you're spending huge amounts of money on it all the time, the main systems that you have are relatively inflexible. And that might mean that you can run changes on some of the core infrastructure in NAB, maybe on a monthly basis or something like that. And I know, actually, I think there's a few NAB people in the class, David, but a few people from technology might know this better than me. But what a cloud native neobank like 86400 has is the ability for that to be all modern technology. And so what we've done in NAB, in our technology stack, is to isolate the bits that are the core bits, the older bits, and you're minimizing the impact of them. So you're breaking bits off them, building it new and putting it into the cloud. And so you're trying to get more nimble, but in the end, you still have some core infrastructure that is old and quite inflexible. When you think about something like 86400, it's cloud native and its flexibility is the whole way down its technology stack. So 86400 is delivering a new customer feature every 2 weeks. It's got a very flexible database collecting all of the right information that you need in a really seamless way. Its processes that hang off that are all therefore simple and easy to use. And, you know, it's got sort of features like it's 90 seconds to onboard you as a new customer. It's a fantastic piece of technology as a bank. And so it was the main driver of it. We want to retire. Effectively, we will move all the UBank customers onto 86400, and then we will decommission all of the old UBank technology, and then we will keep this technology separate. So we want to keep it independent, nimble, moving, quicker. And so that's what's doing. So it's different than the transformation that we've had on our own technology, which is about modernising and stabilising core infrastructure. This is much more about moving quicker and more in the sort of, customer digital sort of space in the business stack. So, there are other things. We wanted to have an acquisition vehicle for younger customers. There's lots of other reasons why we did something like 86400, but the technology was a core part of it. Yeah.
Well, thanks so much for that great answer. And I think on this note, we'll conclude. So I wanted to thank you on behalf of the class for sharing your evening with us. It's been incredibly illuminating, and I know personally have learned a lot from hearing you speak. And, speaking for the group, we feel very lucky that you've been willing to share your time with us in this way.
No, thanks, David. Yeah, and shout out to the NABers that are on the call. And thanks, David. Thanks for having me. I got fond memories of Melbourne Uni, so it's nice to be able to come back. Yeah.
Okay, great. Thanks so much. Have a good evening.